The last couple of years have seen a noticeable surge in Fangan content, with many fan creators trying their hand at the Danganronpa formula. As a point of reference, the final chapter of Super Danganronpa Another 2, one of the most popular and well-known fan games out there, was released in full on January 10th, 2020. One of the bigger rises in Fangans came from Instagram, with the stories posted there sometimes being called Instaronpas. Given the source material began as a visual novel and how one can post up to 10 different images in one post, Instagram seemed a good place for one to post their stories to. Add to this a fan community eager for more content and YouTube channels like SHSL Blaze live streaming their reactions to Fangans, and some of these projects began to see a fair amount of coverage and success. However, as Instaronpas became more visible to more people, some were skeptical, feeling the quality of some was not quite up to par. This likely came as the result of many of these projects being made by younger fans who were new to writing murder mysteries, and perhaps even writing in general. While those who chose to stick around and see where these stories would go came to accept and expect some fan projects to have early growing pains, it could still take time before Instaronpa writers felt they found their groove. I can't speak for everyone, of course, but I imagine when most people think of a typical Instaronpa, the image is something like this. A rocky start for the first couple of chapters, followed by a noticeable improvement in the writing about halfway in, with the rest of the story also showing increases in quality. The initial chapters tend to be very short, but get longer towards the end as Danganronpa chapters tend to. I also feel many Instaronpas tend to choose between giving more focus to daily life or deadly life, often the former in my experience, and the first few cases can feel lacking in how much is explained about the mystery. While I do feel a short runtime can lead to a feeling of rushed pacing, this doesn't mean making longer cases is an automatic solution to these problems. The main series saw the runtime of its trials and main story lengthen with each new installment. However, the longest cases aren't always considered the best ones, even if one disregards the Chapter 6 trials. It seems to be agreed that V3's trials, the last few at least, can drag a bit, with the story dwelling on a single topic for too long. Sometimes less is more, and today I intend to show what I feel to be an excellent example for writing a short yet well-composed Fangan chapter. Penguinronpa was the first Fangan I started following. While there are many aspects of it that I find praiseworthy and am interested in discussing in the future, today's focus will be on the entirety of its second chapter. The combined length of Penguinronpa Chapter 2 on YouTube is a little under 2 hours, and despite being so early in the story, it's packed with intriguing content. Given its short length, Chapter 2 uses its time very efficiently, but not to the point it feels like the story is rushing to get to the next plot point. It also finds a good fit in the overall narrative, following on from Chapter 1 very well, and moving several pieces into place for the events of Chapter 3 to occur. All of this is wrapped up in an interesting murder mystery which the creator, Tofudamaru, considers their personal favorite, as well as several character moments that serve to benefit the story. As is often the case with Danganronpa stories, it doesn't take long before Monobert announces that new areas of the island have been opened up. The remaining characters split up to explore, and already Tofu's writing starts showing its strengths. Club Penguin Island itself is a familiar location to both the characters and most likely the viewer, but the alterations made to the island to host the killing game give it an underlying sense of foreboding. Examples include the clock tower and the snow forts being replaced with a Monobert-themed PA system in the prologue, and the pet shop being mentioned as being devoid of puffles in Chapter 2, something which concerns Puffle handler and lover Paige in particular. Despite the characters being in a familiar setting, the context of the killing game is used to guide their actions as they see what may have changed with the introduction of these locations. For instance, one of the groups investigates the previously locked dojo after it was used as the setting for Sensei's execution. It even ties into the cast's plan to escape, as well as the chapter's murder. Another case of this also ties into something I feel any new expansion of the space the characters are living at should do. Introduce new potential tools for future murders. Agent, Paige, Jetpack Guy, and Frankie investigate the lighthouse and find some sheet music marked with Monobert's face. Some experimentation leads to them realizing anyone who hears the music except for the person who played it will be put to sleep, and those asleep won't wake up unless they hear a loud sound. The group also finds some jetpack fuel in the lighthouse, but the sheet music makes Agent skeptical it may be a trap. A test of said fuel using a remote-controlled jetpack in turn reveals the aforementioned force fields also cover the top of the island. Speaking of jetpacks, they're a common topic of discussion due to being the first means of escape the characters think of, and a good chunk of the first 2 chapters involves the characters trying to find or make some fuel for them. Through this, the setting's familiarity is used again, as references to Club Penguin content like a recipe for emergency fuel are brought up. Little details like this, which explain what the characters are doing, why they're doing it, and how the killing game is operating, go a long way to making the story feel more thought out and complete. Despite the lack of progress on leaving the island, Jetpack Guy and Agent still take the time to fly to the peak of the tallest mountain, where they discover some items from the Club Penguin DS game, Herbert's Revenge. But this time, their familiarity is used to build up some mystery. While Dot and Gary recognize a crab disguise and a camera, respectively, as their own work, they have no memory of making them. These two items also end up being important later on. It's a natural follow-up to the blueprint in Chapter 1, which did get a mention during that chapter's investigation, but was more of a hint towards more reveals to come. Through these discoveries and discussions, the characters come off as more proactive in the story, in that they're trying to escape their dire situation and make sense of what's happening. I tend to like this approach more than, say, Danganronpa 2's cast, which could often feel like they were spinning their wheels when it came to uncovering the mystery. In their 2021 Q&A, Tofu has stated that they consider daily life to be just as important as deadly life in Danganronpa stories, and Chapter 2 demonstrates this belief well. It sees quite a few character arcs and interactions of interest, and is one of several ways the chapter finds its niche in the narrative. To start, Rookie is absent for most of daily life, often not even showing up for group meetings due to the shock of the previous trial. Throughout Chapter 1, Rookie was understandably stressed about the situation, and confided his fears to Agent. While he was able to calm his nerves with some help from Sensei, the latter then turned out to be the first killer, and left Rookie with an assurance that he was stronger than he thought. His absence becomes a point of concern for others, most notably Agent and Jetpack Guy. During their flight, Agent suggests Rookie might be thinking about Sensei's parting words, but still not believing them to be true. JPG, meanwhile, brings up Rookie's incredible determination, a quality he finds admirable and pledges to remind him of. The interactions between JPEG and Rookie and the exploration of their relationship is one of the longer arcs Penguinronpa has to offer, and the way it's introduced feels natural in context and in line with the characters as we've seen them thus far. That night, JPEG gets Rookie to rejoin the group and even lends him his jetpack for a while to give him some more confidence. Following this, the latter's mood improves, with him being the one to suggest throwing a party to get everyone's mind off the killing game and the new motive. This shift can also be seen with how he reacts to Monobert's motives. In Chapter 1, the reveal of a traitor hidden within the group rattles him. Here, though, Rookie isn't shaken, even pointing out how, for all anyone knows, Monobert could be lying. This continues when he ends up taking on his own role in putting the party together, helping decorate the lighthouse and bringing Agent and Klutzy over when they oversleep. Another major character moment involves the remaining EPF agents deciding on who will take over the role of director after Antarctic's death. Despite some initial apprehension, Agent accepts the position at the encouragement of their fellow agents. This soon gives way to some excitement for becoming the head of the organization they have valued for keeping the island safe for several years, as well as a desire to live up to the expectations Antarctic would have for her successor. This moment is also accompanied by a sprite change, the clearest and most direct way of marking a character's development in a series like this. In Agent's case, the director's symbol now appears on their tie. Another interesting moment with Agent comes towards the end of daily life, when everyone is put to sleep by the strange song from earlier. There they have a dream about an unseen choir of voices telling Agent they are the only one who can save them. While the full meaning behind this sequence isn't known at this time, it lays the groundwork for similar scenes later on, as well as Agent's monologue from the final scene of Chapter 5. Mixed in with these character moments are several smaller, more missable moments which further enhance some of the characters. As everyone is deciding on who will go where in the initial investigation, Dot decides to let Klutzy come with her group, showing how she's willing to work with a former enemy. Frankie brings up his missing bandmates as he's investigating the lighthouse, indicating that they're still on his mind. Gary insists on working on a DVD player 3000 for the party, an invention which seems to not have much use, as he feels he'll get antsy if he's left with nothing to do for too long. This could also be seen as foreshadowing when he later laments his failure to keep everyone safe, most of all the agents he sees as family, and a reason why he works himself so hard to help everyone else escape afterward. Just like the small details explaining how and why characters take certain actions, these smaller bits of development give the story some more flavor, acting as points of reference which can be traced back to when the larger character arcs become more apparent. Before too long, Monobert introduces the next motive. Should no murders happen in the next 48 hours, the new world, and all the penguins and puffles living there, will be destroyed. Despite Agent pointing out how the primary motive would become useless if the time limit were to pass, Monobert still feels certain someone will crack. Given the way a Danganronpa killing game works, the first motive is perhaps the most important one, as it is the means with which to set the game into motion. This is necessary, given how steep the consequences of being convicted are. However, some fangans, and even trigger Happy Havoc from the main series, include, or exclude if you prefer, an additional element by not informing the characters of the trial system until after someone is killed. This can allow for more believability when someone inevitably decides to kill. In the case of fangans like Penguinronpa, I would argue the second motive is just as important as the first, if not more so. Since the characters are aware of what will happen if someone is killed, a future killer needs a very good reason to take someone's life. After the first motive, with everyone aware of the rules of the game, has passed, one may be able to justify using less threatening motives with the increased distrust among the group. Once it's clear murder, even under these dire circumstances, is still quite possible. All of this is to show how this chapter's motive makes sense for where the story is at this point, especially given how the group is still relatively united. The use of a party for a potential murder scene is nothing new to Danganronpa or fangans, but is always a welcome sight given the interesting possibilities it can create. What makes Penguinronpa's use of it stand out is how the lead-up to the inevitable murder plays out. It begins with everyone gathering at the lighthouse the morning after the motive announcement to decide how to get the party set up. Frankie and Cadence, who were enthusiastic about performing at the lighthouse, arrive late and say they won't be attending. This prompts Gary to suggest his idea for building his DVD player 3000 to play some movies for entertainment. From there, the rest of the cast decide on how they'll prepare. Dot takes on the role of making pizzas for everyone, Shadow Guy and Gamma Gal head to the coffee shop to prepare some drinks, and Rookie, Rory, and Rockhopper go to the gift shop for some decorations. Everyone else is left with not much else to do but wait for the party to start, though Gary later requests Agent and Klutzy pick up some movies to watch. The characters being assigned various tasks to prepare for the party ends up serving as an innocuous way to give certain characters alibis. On the other hand, Frankie, Cadence, Paige, and Jetpack Guy either having nothing to do or acting differently to how they were before is a subtle way of establishing them as the main suspects of the case. After Agent and Klutzy share a tender moment, they come across an unexpected scene. Despite being framed as a body discovery, it turns out to be a fake-out, with Dot just being covered in tomato sauce and pizza toppings. Dot says she passed out while making pizzas, which caused the Pizzatron 3000 to make a mess of food in the kitchen. At her request, Agent, Klutzy, Paige, and Jetpack Guy all help her clean up the food. Soon after, the party begins, and it becomes clear Cadence and Frankie decided to follow through with their plans of not attending. As the night goes on, Klutzy is teleported back to Monobert's personal quarters like usual, and not long after, the sleep-inducing song from earlier plays. A loud noise then wakes everyone up again, and seconds later, Frankie and Cadence burst in, saying the ice rink has caught on fire. Everyone else also notices Rockhopper is missing. Once again, the familiar and inviting setting of Club Penguin is contrasted with the harsh, foreboding nature of the killing game. Rockhopper's body discovery scene shows him lying dead, blood spattering the ground, and a knife in his chest. Meanwhile, chunks of the ice rink that haven't yet melted are floating on the water, with the flames continuing to burn. Rockhopper being the victim in this case is admittedly one of the weaker parts of Chapter 2. The most obvious flaw is his lack of screen time, with him having even less presence than the characters who died before him. This is reflected by him only having 2 sprites, which has become a running joke in Tofu's Penguinronpa specials, Q&As, and other content. While Tofu's acknowledgement of missed potential and improvement of their craft is something I respect, I do want to take a minute to play devil's advocate for their choice of victim. Even if one ignores the killer's reasoning as to why Rockhopper was their target, his death coming at this point has some value. For one thing, Rockhopper is one of the most recognizable characters in Club Penguin, and is also among the mascots with the most in-game appearances. Having such a familiar face die so suddenly is bound to leave an impact, much as it did with Antarctic and Sensei. Furthermore, with the possible exception of Rookie, Rockhopper is perhaps the biggest comic relief in this cast. In their 2021 Q&A, Tofu went over what role the deceased characters would play if they survived longer. For Rockhopper, they felt he would be a comic relief character. Losing one of the more lighthearted characters also helps to usher in a shift in the series' tone. While comedy is still fairly prevalent throughout Penguinronpa as a whole, just about everything involving the murders and distrust among the group becomes more serious and emotional from this point on. Given everything I've said thus far, Chapter 2's case ends up being a great way to usher in this shift. When one thinks of the average low-effort fangan, the image tends to be of one which rushes through the build-up to the murders, in other words, cutting to the chase. However, even the cases in these fangans can feel underdeveloped, with the investigations sometimes feeling like there isn't much direction or logic guiding the characters around, and any clues they come across either feel incidental or are too vague. Part of the fun of a mystery for the viewer is following along and observing the clues at the same pace as the characters, and potentially being able to determine the conclusion themselves. This isn't true of all mysteries, but the Danganronpa series tends to leave clues and foreshadowing hidden in plain sight, some of which aren't immediately obvious. This gives the reader or player the ability to work through the case themselves before the trial if they want. In the aforementioned Q&A, Tofu gave a few explanations over how they write the series. The most relevant statement here is when they explain that their main goal in writing a trial is having everything make sense, rather than having it be difficult to figure out. Their reasoning for this is because Penguinronpa is a story and not a game, and so the person experiencing it is a viewer rather than a player. Without this expectation, there's less reason to have a complicated mystery with more layers to it, and while Tofu does place less emphasis on the difficulty of the case, they don't throw it out the window. Their statements on this topic without a doubt apply to Chapter 2. The investigation follows a clear yet concise flow, with every room, agent, and company investigate having some relevance to the case or odd events leading up to it. It begins at the ice rink, progresses to where Rockhopper was last seen at the lighthouse, then goes to the dojo after determining the remote-controlled jetpack was involved somehow, and ends at the pizza parlor on account of Dot inexplicably passing out there. There are also some clues that, while minor, help to answer certain questions about the murder. For example, Rockhopper is missing his hat when his body is discovered, and it later turns up at the beacon. This, combined with the remote-controlled jetpack not being in its compartment in the dojo, and its remote being found in the lighthouse, can actually lead one to figure out the cause of death ahead of time. On the subject of the cause of death, it's noticeably omitted from the autopsy report Monobert provides the characters. Whenever this is done in a Danganronpa game, the omitted information tends to be crucial to solving the case, and the use of the trope here makes sense given the seemingly obvious murder weapon. For my last point about the investigation, quite a few characters get involved with trying to piece it together. The EPF agents, being more trained in crime solving, take up most of the screen time, though other characters like Rory are present to give potential counterpoints. As far as contributions go, Gary helps Agent fish up a potential clue from the ice rink, Rookie is the one to suggest going to the dojo to check if the RC jetpack is still around, and Agent notices the knife in Rockhopper's chest is identical to the ones from the pizza parlor. In addition, we have some foreshadowing for reveals to come, with Jetpack Guy taking some pleasure in the smell of a fishing rod, which is later revealed to be because of the scent of jetpack fuel, and Gary commenting that a fire would have to be quite powerful to melt the ice rink. Overall, the investigation does everything it should. It brings up plenty of clues and pieces of information relevant to the case to get the viewer thinking about the mystery, and manages to get a fairly complicated scenario across in a short span of time. Despite that, there is still time for some more comedic moments, like Agent's frustrated interactions with Monobert, and Rookie being his usual comic relief self. The trial begins in an interesting position, with an explanation which seems obvious and later turns out to be wrong, but is still somewhat relevant to the case. At first, Frankie and Cadence become prime suspects due to not being at the party, and Frankie's poor attempt at lying about whether or not they went to the pizza parlor puts even more pressure on them. After more discussion, Agent concludes the sleep-inducing song from before wasn't played by anyone at the party. Instead, the killer recorded themselves playing it on the piano in the pizza parlor using the spy camera 3000, which they then connected to the DVD player 3000 to put everyone to sleep during the party. Because this was a key part of the murder, most of the first part of the trial is spent checking alibis to rule out suspects, something that's always fun with so many people still alive. Cadence is then cornered due to lacking an alibi and a pair of her headphones being found at the crime scene, which leads to her and Frankie admitting to their involvement. This moment here is a great example of having information be revealed only after the trial has started, which the main series also does a lot. In Chapter 2's case, it adds some more depth to the case by having characters other than the killer and victim putting their own plan into motion, and also leads to the unveiling of even more information about the case. As it turns out, Cadence and Frankie received letters from the killer threatening that they would be killed if they showed up to the party, which prompted them to attack the killer if necessary. Cadence and Frankie are questioned more about what happened after the song was played, and here we get an interesting use of the mechanics of the killing game itself in a case. The two claim that after hearing an explosion at the ice rink, they rushed over. There they saw Rockhopper's body, at which point the body discovery announcement went off. However, Agent points out that they and the others have no memory of a BDA happening, so they ask Monobert how they work. Monobert says the announcement plays when two people other than the killer find the body. With this information, Cadence and Frankie are cleared of suspicion, and Gary also points out the knife they were planning to attack the killer with couldn't have been the murder weapon. Discussion then shifts to the cause of death, where some of the less obvious clues, like the smell Jetpack Guy noticed and the burnt bits of brown leather on Rockhopper's corpse, are brought up and given their payoffs. The murder method in this case being a fatal fall via jetpack slamming into the ground is quite creative. It ties elements of the setting into how the case plays out, and even who could have done it. After it's decided that the RC jetpack must have been the one used for the murder, Gary says he put it back in its secret compartment in the dojo, which is in a room only EPF agents know about. Given the other characters didn't even know the EPF existed until the previous trial, Agent realizes the killer has to either be themselves, JPEG, Rookie, Dot, Gary, or Paige. While it isn't discussed outright, this reveal has a lot of weight, showing how even the EPF agents, who are sworn to protect the island and its inhabitants, are not above murder in these conditions. As for the culprit, the question becomes who had the opportunity to take the jetpack, and the only people without alibis during that time are Frankie, Cadence, JPG, and Paige. Given his status as an EPF agent and jetpack enthusiast, JPG is put on the spot, and there isn't any hard evidence to prove him innocent. However, Rookie interjects as the original Ace Attorney Cornered theme starts playing. While he doesn't have any direct proof, he does bring up a clue even Agent nearly forgot about: the bloodstain the two found in the secret training room. Some nonverbal communication from Klutzy gets Agent to realize the bloodstain was actually tomato sauce, bringing the Dot fake out full circle, and giving Rookie some follow-up on his character arc during the chapter. The characters realize someone who cleaned up the mess in the pizza parlor must have left it behind, assuming they slid their back against the sliding door to shut it. As a quick side note, this scene also has a moment where Paige tries to refute Agent's point, leading to a slide where the two are shown on the split screen, similar to a rebuttal showdown. Considering Tofu's tendency to integrate more Danganronpa game mechanics as the series has progressed, it's interesting to see how there was a sort of precursor to them this early on. Anyway, after Jetpack Guy shows he's able to hold his namesake with one flipper, while Paige struggles to hold it with both, the tide turns against her. Agent's last bit of proof is that she could have used her whistle to wake everyone up, and a quick experiment proves the sound is a match. Paige is frustrated for going through her nightmare a second time, to which Agent points out that it should have been her third. I point this out because of how it contrasts with the last time the killer slipped on their lie. Whereas Sensei's slip-up was what tipped off Agent and their colleagues to start questioning him more, Paige's only comes up after multiple solid points against her have been proven. Once proven as the killer, Paige finally admits to her crime. She explains her motive, going off the assumption that if the new world were to be destroyed, all the penguins and Puffles there would die, and so she killed Rockhopper to save them. Paige also says Klutzy was her original target, but him being with Monobert half the time limited her options. So she went for Rockhopper since she figured he wouldn't mind sacrificing himself for his Puffle and first mate, Yar. Paige's motive takes a darker turn as she says any true Puffle fan would have done what she did, and she views herself as a savior of Puffles. She also talks about her nightmare, where she saw countless Puffles slaughtered right in front of her. The CG for this scene depicts the killed Puffles in the same style as the background characters in the Danganronpa 3 anime and Ultra Despair Girls, which is a nice touch. Ever since the nightmare, Paige has been desperate to see a Puffle again to ensure their safety, and wonders if anyone else saw something that could drive them to kill like she did. Dot doesn't take Paige's turn well, saying she doesn't even recognize her. Tofu commented on this scene in the 2021 Q&A, where they said if they could make one change to Chapter 2, they would tone down Paige's breakdown. They explain it was mostly done for fan service, although Tofu says Paige would still be in despair during this scene, and feels she was overly rude to Klutzy. I find myself agreeing here. While it's interesting to see the most destructive murder also produce the most selfish killer, which becomes even more so combined with her status as an EPF agent, the tone of the other murders makes this one stand out in an odd way. As far as I can tell, it's not in the service of a greater theme or plot point, like how Mikan's murder in Danganronpa 2 was to serve as some light foreshadowing for later on. However, I think the choice to make Paige the killer here was a great choice for the narrative. So far, the EPF agents have been leading the investigations for the most part, to the point they handled most of the first one since the other characters felt they were more equipped to handle it. Antarctic's death showed death wasn't impossible for them, but it would be natural to assume they would be less inclined to murder than the others. Having Paige do the deed works well on this front. Furthermore, because she's a more minor character compared to the other agents, it means more recognizable characters like Gary and Dot don't have to be written into a scenario where killing seems the most sensible solution from their perspective. Paige's death also leaves behind a significant impact, for reasons I'll get to in a bit. Her execution is another solid point for Chapter 2, with Tofu even considering it their personal favorite of the bunch. Like the last one, it's based on a Club Penguin minigame relevant to the character, but with a deadly twist. In Paige's case, she has to play a game of Puffle Roundup, chasing around robotic Puffles and herding them into a pen. Once they're all there, the group is shot out of a cannon from Puffle launch, where they land in the clouds and see a rainbow Puffle. When it leaps to join them, it turns out to be a bomb, which causes the cloud they're standing on to vanish. As she falls, Paige tries to use the ability of the Robo-Puffles to save them and herself, also referencing a couple of the elite Puffles in the process, only for them to also be bombs, which explode and kill her. We then cut to a series of shots following Paige's blood spattering the snow as her now battered hat hits the ground, as though representing her fall from grace. Overall, it's a nice blend of references to various bits of Puffle content from Club Penguin, and a literally explosive send-off for Paige herself. Naturally, everyone else is appalled at the brutal manner of the execution. On the other hand, Dot says Paige betrayed the EPF and killed for her own selfish gain, whereas Sensei at least killed to protect everyone. Dot accuses Monobird of driving Paige to murder, and swears to destroy him and end the killing game. Everyone else is quick to return to their igloos, but not before another scene with Dot and Agent. Dot asks Agent if they still have Paige's whistle, which she takes with little more than a word, before leaving in a huff. This scene also marks the first time Dot's backward-facing sprite is used, showing the impact the events of the trial have had on her. Meanwhile, Klutzy has been teleported back to the PSA headquarters, where Monobert pokes fun at him for trying to communicate with the usually silent Wheelbot in the gadget room. When it speaks, Monobird explains he has begun remotely charging it and the other two test bots, which have been hidden elsewhere. Monobird feels he may need them for a backup plan. Despite his confidence that most of the Penguins would be dead within a week of the killing game, and how he portrays himself to the other characters, things aren't going as smoothly as he is letting on. Whatever deal the traitor offered him at the end of Chapter 1 has apparently gone through, so they're not doing his bidding anymore. Meanwhile, Agent has made quick work of both murder cases thus far. He also mentions some mysterious higher-ups who want him to stop taking chances, especially with the threat Agent poses. However, his smug confidence returns as he starts belittling Klutzy again, as the latter's inability to communicate means he can't inform anyone of what he knows. As Monobert laughs and Klutzy despairs at the situation, Chapter 2 comes to an end. I've made a few mentions so far about how Chapter 2 follows up on aspects of what came before and also sets up what's to come in Chapter 3 and beyond, but there are still a few examples I haven't gotten to. Frankie and Cadence get a fair amount of focus in Chapter 2, in large part due to their involvement in the case. Their chemistry, actions, and ability to work together being showcased here sets up the next part of their arc in Chapter 3. Frankie in particular gets a fair bit of foreshadowing for his side of it, although it's not obvious at first. Early on, he mentions his bandmates while exploring the lighthouse, but the more evident moment comes after the trial. After she admits to her crime, Paige ponders what nightmares the others must have had, considering how horrendous hers was, to which Frankie has a slight reaction. This is likely meant to indicate his concern about the safety of his bandmates, which becomes a major focus for him, and by extension Cadence, in the next chapter. Paige's actions and role as Chapter 2's killer leave behind a huge impact, affecting several characters, some of them over the course of multiple chapters. The most obvious of these is Dot, who hides her fear and pain under a colder, much more stern expression throughout Chapter 3. She only reconciles with Agent at the end of Chapter 3 itself, and doesn't rejoin the group until about halfway into Chapter 4. Jetpack Guy's reaction is less obvious, but he is notably the one EPF agent to believe Dot is the killer during Chapter 3's Scrum debate. The impact on Gary is a little more drawn out. He tries to reassure Agent after initial attempts to console Dot fail. Then in Chapter 4, he admits to having guilt of feeling he failed to look after the agents, wondering if he could have reined Paige back in before she went through with her plan. While the effects of Rockhopper's death require a bit of reading between the lines to see, Paige's betrayal leaves a lot for the characters to mull over in its wake. The tone of this chapter's ending also feels like a natural continuation of Chapter 1. While Monobert has his concerns behind the scenes, Klutzy is the only one aware of this, and has no way of telling anyone anything he knows. As for the main cast, if losing their main leader figure wasn't bad enough, they now have to contend with the fact that someone intending to use the Killing Game's rules as laid out by Monobert despite knowing what would happen to everyone else is not only a possibility, it's become a reality. The first person to try this being an EPF agent adds insult to injury, showing even they're corruptible, and Doc's change in mood is a sign of the splintering of the group this could cause. All of this is to say, if Chapter 1 left the cast in a rough but likely salvageable state, Chapter 2 leaves them much worse off than before. And considering what tends to occur in the third chapter of most Danganronpa stories, it sets the expectation that the worst is yet to come. While Chapter 1 provided a decent, if less fleshed out start to Penguinronpa, Chapter 2 is where I feel the series first hits its stride. It applies more of the mechanics and tropes of Danganronpa to the Club Penguin setting, but still keeps the characters and tone relatively in line with how they have been established. Despite a somewhat short runtime, the chapter's efficient use of time allows for several character arcs to be started or followed up on, and it sets the stage for what's to come in Chapter 3. All of this is combined with a mystery bearing just the right level of complexity. Said mystery uses aspects of the setting to its advantage, creating a scenario that makes sense and has a nice balance of information to ensure one likely won't know everything going into the trial, but also provides enough clues so they aren't totally in the dark either. On top of being a joy to watch, Penguinrompa's second chapter is a great guide on how to write a short yet solid Fangan chapter. Thank you very much for watching. If you haven't already, please check out Tofudomaru's channel for the actual Penguinronpa series, which I will link in the description. They also have other odds and ends of Club Penguin related content, like an in-depth playthrough of its first DS game. This video started off as an essay I wrote a few months back, and I've got a couple of others on deck that I'm thinking about giving similar treatment, as well as some other ideas that I haven't gotten around to writing yet, but we'll see where that takes us, if anywhere. Regardless of where I go next, I hope to see you again soon. Take care, everyone.